Of all the metaphors in the Bible to describe sin, the metaphor of debt is perhaps the one that has had the most staying power. It has also been the source of some problematic thinking about the relationship between sin and forgiveness, especially for us children of the Protestant Reformation. But just because it has led to some problematic thinking doesn't mean that we should reject it altogether. But we do need to be clear about the problem and how to avoid falling into its trap. Hello, I'm Stuart Baskin, pastor of First Presbyterian Church of Tyler, Texas, and this is your daily devotional for Saturday, March 2nd, 2024. Lots of people in our world struggle with debt. For some, it takes the form of crushing student loans. For others, it is the mounting credit card debt that stifles them. For still others who struggle just to make ends meet, it is the scourge of payday loans that drags them down. But if we think we're the first generation in human history to experience the problem of debt, well, we're wrong. It has been a problem for centuries, even millennia. The worst kind is when someone falls behind and then has to work off their debt by working for the owner of the debt. It becomes a never-ending cycle of debt that can almost never be paid off. And when the debtor dies, it is the children who assume the debt and find themselves chained to the same never-ending cycle. No wonder, then, that one of the most enduring metaphors for sin is debt. Our actions put us into a kind of debtor position with God. Even the Lord's Prayer uses the metaphor when it talks about sin and forgiveness. Forgive us our debts, as we forgive our debtors, it says. All of which begs the question, how do we get out of the debt of sin? In classical Pauline theology, and especially in Protestant theology, there is nothing we can do to earn forgiveness. That is a gift of God's free grace, freely offered, freely given, requiring only our gratitude in return. But because the metaphor of debt is so powerful, many in the history of the faith have naturally reasoned that we can store up credits in heaven by doing good works on earth. And in some reckonings, some people can build up such great stores of moral credit that they can even debit their own accounts and give their moral credits to others. This seems to be what Jesus implies when he says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust consume and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourself treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust consumes, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Treasure in heaven. This sure sounds like moral credits we can draw upon to offset sin. But I think you can probably see the problem here. And it is a problem the Apostle Paul practically shouted from the housetops about. Trusting anything other than the grace and mercy of God freely offered in Jesus Christ for him amounted to blasphemy. It amounts to saying that we neither need God for our salvation nor trust God to provide salvation. Here's just one example of Paul talking about this problem, this in the letter to the Romans. "But now, apart from the law," he writes, "the righteousness of God has been disclosed, and it is attested by the law and the prophets, the righteousness of God through faith in Jesus Christ for all who believe. For there is no distinction. Since all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, they are now justified by his grace as a gift through the redemption that is in Christ Jesus, whom God put forward as a sacrifice of atonement by his blood, effective through faith. He did this to show his righteousness, because in his divine forbearance he had passed over the sins previously committed. It was to prove at the present time that he himself is righteous, and that he justifies the one who has faith in Jesus. Then what becomes of boasting? It is excluded. By what law? By that of works? No, but by the law of faith. For we hold that a person is justified by faith apart from works prescribed by the law. So, does this mean morally virtuous acts are worthless? Of course not. It only means that they don't function as credits on some moral balance sheet that counteract the debt of sin. Both Paul and our Reformed tradition are very clear that our salvation is not something we earn, but rather is a gift of God's free grace. Does this all nullify the idea of sin as a debt? No, not at all. But it is important to remember that it is a metaphor. And like all metaphors, when pushed too far, it starts to unravel. When we take metaphors like this one literally, then we can stray into areas where the metaphor never intended to take us. So, let's by all means continue our Presbyterian practice of using debts and debtors in the Lord's Prayer. But let's also remember that just because we use the metaphor of debt doesn't mean it is something we can pay off by works of moral virtue. It is just a metaphor after all. And now may God continue to bless you and keep you in all that you do this day and in all the days ahead.